this is always kind of tricky as you try to get these things work from place to place. So I usually try to come up with a clever title, and I failed today. I tried to get something snappy and something that will get a lot of views. Maybe just people just come over because, oh, that looks interesting. And there's a guy out there that does these videos, and he goes, something weird is happening and something strange is going on, and he gets hundreds of thousands of views on each of the videos he puts up. And not that I'm jealous of that. I mean, because he doesn't really talk. He just puts together some interesting clips. So I thought, well, maybe I share with you my favorite title that I ever did, because I worked hours on photoshopping this. It was called the canary is on life support. The canary is, I had the canary is dying about a week or two before that. And then the canary is on life support. You see the little goldfish in the IV bag. So I'm very proud of that. One of the things I talk about is that I talk about the convergence of events. Let me explain this and put it in context. And if you've heard me talk about this quite a bit. As we get closer to the end, as we get closer to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there is a convergence of events. There will be things happening prophetically that the Bible has talked about for millennia that are going to start being fulfilled in rapid succession. So what I do is I sort of break things down into categories. And by the way, there is a biblical precedent for that. And one of the things you learn when you study Bible prophecy is that Jewish prophecy is often based on a pattern. What happened before will happen again. That's why the book of Genesis is a picture of the end times. That's why the taking of the city of Jericho and the book of Joshua has a lot of relationship to the book of Revelation. And in fact, I think 85 or 90% of the book of Revelation has direct references to the Old Testament. So there are a number of things that Jesus and others have told us to watch out for. For example, one of the things Jesus said was, take heed that no man deceive you. In fact, that was a warning he gave 4 times more than anything else that he talked about when he was talking relative to the end times. That in the end times there would be great deception. And that deception is going to operate on many levels. It's going to operate in the church, and I'll show you some examples of that. It's going to operate in geopolitics. But do we have deception going on in geopolitics? It's going to happen in culture and morality and sexuality. Do we have deception going on and confusion going on there? And what you'll find when you study prophecy is that there were many prophecies regarding the first coming of the Messiah. And most of those prophecies about, the first 32 years and 33 years and however many weeks into his 33rd year, about 40% of the prophecies that related to the Messiah's first coming were fulfilled. The other 60% were fulfilled in that last week. So the same pattern will hold when we get closer to the end, because I'm sure you hear Bible prophecy speakers and teachers and people on radio, and they always say, what do they say? Every time we get together, it's like, I can't believe what's happening. I can't believe it's happening that fast. I can't keep up with all that's going on. And it's becoming increasingly difficult. Now, it just so happened, the reason why my title is a little less than creative this week, Geopolitical Watch, is because it was a relatively slow week. I guess the world powers knew that John Haller was on vacation, so we take a little bit of a week off. I'm sure it didn't have anything to do with it. But a lot of times I will look at secular sources. I read a lot of intelligence, foreign policy journals, look at a lot of conferences. It seems like everything is live. Everything in the world is live streamed these days. So if you want to watch the conference, and I'll play some clips from the Davos World Economic Forum that just took place, you can sit and you can watch all of their talks. You can watch when they have technology conferences, which is, I think, a very big part of the end times, the growth and acceleration of technology. You can watch those conferences online. They're all streamed. But what I always find interesting is when the secular world, the non-Christian world, the people that don't really know Bible prophecy in that type of thing, they seem to understand that something is going on. There are things happening that are strange. Something weird is going on. So this is a foreign policy cover from a few years ago, A World Disrupted. And I will tell you that ever since that foreign policy magazine came out, it has been a world disrupted. There has been massive change. In my second talk that follows this one, I'm going to talk about a trip that Pam and I took to Israel last year. But we went 7 years ago. In fact, 7 years ago, right this week, right this day, we were in Israel. The second day we were there, maybe it was the third day, we were staying at a resort on the Sea of Galilee. Beautiful area. The Sea of Galilee was like glass that morning. It was the crystal clear blue sky. But 30 miles away in a Syrian city named Dara, they were having street riots, and that was the official beginning of the Syrian civil war. In fact, the anniversary of that was Thursday, 7 years ago, because McMaster gave a speech to commemorate the 7th anniversary of the start of the Civil War. And look at what's happened in that Civil War. If we think our lives are disrupted by what's going on, that was a country of about 21 million people. There are between 500,000 and a million dead. Nobody knows for sure. There are over 4 million refugees that have left the country. Internally displaced, there are about 6.5 million people. So when you add up those numbers, you find that about 60% of the country does not live where they lived 7 years ago. And I'll show you some pictures of what's going on. So foreign policy came out a few years ago, and they said it's a world disrupted. Their current cover is this, and you see the little imagery that they use: pollution, nuclear explosions, drones, helicopters, people shooting each other, and they say, can we fix this? Now, the advantage of being a Christian and having a biblical worldview is that we can look at this and we can say, boy, it is troubling times, but the Lord told us that these kind of times were coming. He gave us warnings. He gave us patterns to look for. In Luke chapter 17, he says, as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. As it was in the days of Lot, so will it be in the coming of the Son of Man. So if you want to know what's going to happen at the end, take Jesus' command and go look and see what happened, what was going on in the days of Lot, what was going on in the days of Noah. Now, we know what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah and the evil, immorality that occurred there. And then you translate that into our world today, where you can't really even talk about, and I'm sure this is politically incorrect in the state of California, you can't even talk about whether someone, or argue that there are two sexes, two genders, male and female. You know, Facebook, which is headquartered up the road, they say, they have, last I heard there were 57 categories of gender. So we live in a world where they say sex is fixed, you're male or female, but your gender is what you decided to be. And they accuse Christians of being anti-science. They're denying the DNA, they're denying the genetics and the chromosomes. And so when I look at it and I see the Bible saying, as it was in the days of Lot, I sit here and I say, I don't think Lot had to put up with this. And you should also know, so if you feel like Lot felt, in 2 Peter chapter 2 tells us that Lot felt oppressed by the sexual immorality that was going on around him. So if you feel oppressed and upset and discouraged, that's a good thing, because you're feeling like Lot did. And for all the problems that Lot had, he was described in Scripture as what? Righteous Lot. So take some comfort from that. So let's get into just some of the things. I talk about. For example, these are demographic scales broken down by age categories around the world. Now, it used to be that we had a nice bell curve. You had the younger people here that would be real wide, and then it would go up to a peak, and you would have fewer old people. But what has happened, and I've talked about this pretty extensively, But this is a different world in which we live. I can remember one day I was in a judge's chambers on a hearing, or in the courtroom, and we came back after lunch, and the judge's courtroom clerk came out and said, sorry, the judge had to leave to go take care of his mother. And I was thinking, like, he's 75, the judge was 75 years old. And I'm thinking, like, wait a minute, he's ready, I mean, he's on semi-retired status in the federal court system, and I'm like, what is going on? And the next day he came in and said, yeah, my mother had fallen and broken her leg at the nursing home, and I had to go take care of her. And so here's a guy who's ready to and I've had this happen more and more. I have friends in their 70s, and they're still taking care, and they've been retired for 10 years, and they're still taking care of parents. This has not happened in recent human history. But because people are living longer, now we're also in the stage where there's abortion and those type of things, and the fewer people are having babies. Russia and a number of countries, Spain, Japan, are dying demographically. Now, I bring this up because I think that this is a sort of an overlooked factor in this acceleration of things in the end times. I've studied things about the pension system here in California. There are not enough people in the pipeline to pay the pensions that have been promised to these people out here. It just doesn't work. I mean, I have friends from college that retired with six-figure pensions 15 years ago, and they could live another 30 or 35 years. In other words, they worked their 30 and got their full pension, and they'll live 40 years or 45 years past their retirement. It doesn't work. The whole system will collapse at some point, which will cause further disruption. So it's outside of a few demographic groups. For example, in Japan, I don't know if it's an urban legend, I've read it a number of places, they sell more adult diapers than baby diapers. In Russia, the birth rate is 1.1. You need 2.1 just to keep the population even. Russia is 1.1. I think Spain maybe just a little bit lower. But what does that mean? That means in one generation there are half as many people. And so Russia has a massive population problem. And if they're a player in the end times, that means that they have a very short, the window in which all of these players will act is getting increasingly shorter. Now, it could be that things will turn around, but I will say this, the history of mankind has shown that collapsing birth rates are never, ever in history ever been reversed. The cultures die. Europe is dying, Russia, Japan, China now has a massive problem. India has a massive problem. China and India have aborted tens of millions of girl babies, female babies, because they prefer males. The result now is that in a very short period of time, China and India combined, will have about 200 million men that will not have the ability to find a wife in their own culture. Now, what do you think 200 million men are going to do when they don't have an outlet? It doesn't bode well. Russia, the reports I've read many places, in fact, this came out of Foreign Policy magazine. There was an article last year titled Putin's Sunni Muslim Problem. If you want to understand why he's messing around in Syria, understand that in Moscow today, this article reported, and I think it's accurate, that the Sunni Muslim population of Moscow is 25% of the population. Wow. The Russian army is somewhere now between 30 and 40% Muslim. And they say by 2030 that it will be over 50% Muslim by 2030. So that is partly why Putin has gone down there to do things, is because he's trying to deal with his Sunni Muslim problem. The ethnic Russians are dying off. And they're, because of alcoholism and some other things, There are not many old Russian men around. There are a lot of old Russian women that live in just absolutely horrible conditions. So let's just look at some of these things, and then I'm going to get into a little bit of apostasy. I've mentioned this a couple times. I think this is a very important thing to keep bringing up. This is a report, front page of the New York Times about a week ago. They now have apps that allow them to create fake videos. So you with your mouth open right there, not believing this, they could take a video of you and they could impose it and run it through the app, and they could have you saying things that you never said. Now, imagine what's going to happen in the next political cycle. What are we going to do when the candidate says, no, I never said that, it's fake? How does he prove, or she prove, that they never said something? Now, some entrepreneur has suggested, well, we'll just make an app where you can record everything that you do, and therefore then you can deny those things. Well, that's kind of intrusive, isn't it? How many of you have accidentally turned the camera on your phone and have it start recording? Yeah, I recorded my pocket one day, and just because when I think it was on Facebook or something, and the other thing, in fact, this just happened yesterday. I threw my camera in my bag, and it hit the camera button, so it recorded it was dark. I can't delete the thing. Where's the delete button on the video? I've looked, and I'm pretty tech savvy, but I think they do it. They record everything. Played golf with my friend Bill Salas this weekend. A year ago we were playing, and he talked about a private country club in Palm Springs, Palm Desert, where a friend of his belonged. And one of the top professional golfers was staying at his house and practicing, getting ready for the season. The next day, I never looked it up online. The next day, I started getting ads in my Facebook feed for this country club. I'm going to join this country club, even with the magnificent day that I had playing golf at one time. But I don't like to talk about it. This is the type of thing, and I think Pastor Shearer talked about this morning, the coming persecution of Christians. This will be one of the biggest indicators, and it's happening. So this is in England. Scotland Yard is saying, we're going to take children away from extremists. Now the problem is, what do they define as an extremist? Because you know that these little trolls and stuff that work for Facebook and YouTube, they don't have the same definition of you all are extremists. We are all extremists, because they do this all the time. In fact, here's a definition from their prevent duty guidance for England and Wales. Extremism in the prevent strategy is defined as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. We also included in our definition of extremism calls for the death of members of our armed forces. But what are now traditional British values? Are they Christian values, one man, one woman, married for life? Is it male and female? You know it's not. So if you don't hold those values, you are what? You are intolerant and you're an extremist, and they will use this as leverage to come and take your kids away from you. And it's already happening in some cases. Somebody sent me this about Facebook, and I've been in Facebook jail because they don't like what I say sometimes. We've removed your post because it was factually accurate and makes liberals look foolish, which violates our community standards. Any future post based on logic, sound reasoning, and or irrefutable facts will be removed and your account will be suspended. And that's true. You see our politicians do this kind of stupid stuff. Here's Angela Merkel. As you know, there's a massive immigration problem that Germany let all these immigrants in. Angela Merkel, for 3 years since that happened, over 1 million immigrants allowed in with no place, almost 90% of them military-age males. Process that. Talk about tag-along migration, or what are they going to do for a wife or a woman when they want one? Well, they're doing it. It's happening in Sweden, it's happening in France, it's happening in Germany. And there are been reports for many years now that there are no-go zones. And here, finally, in an interview just about a week ago, Angela Merkel said, yes, we do have no-go zones. We have places where the police will not go because it's not safe for them. And we shouldn't like those, but we don't want these, but they do exist. It was a massive admission on her part after she stood there and denied this over and over again that this was not true. And Sweden, what they do in Sweden is they've been cooking the crime statistics to prove that it didn't happen. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I did a talk earlier or last year about woe to the pastors. I'm going to talk a little bit about apostasy in the church. I also want to say that I think it's important that we look and see what's going on and understand the times in which we live. The people, the men of Issachar, they were commended because they were what? They understood the times in which they lived. They paid attention to what was going on. And I've been criticized sometimes, you're doing newspaper exegesis, you're just talking about sensationalistic things and that type of thing. Let me ask you a question. Did Jesus ever talk about things that were in the news? Yeah. Remember, people came to him and they said, this is particularly relevant this week. We had the collapse of a pedestrian bridge in Miami. They came to Jesus and they said, hey, this tower collapsed. And it wasn't a fake tower, it was a real tower. And if you go to Israel, and I'll talk about this in the second hour, there are these watchtowers all over the mountains of Israel. I mean, they're just, it's an incredible thing to see. So they said, this tower collapsed. What did the people do? Did they deserve this? And Jesus gave a lesson. John the Baptist was talking about the scandal going on with Herod and his brother's wife, and he lost his head over it. But he was talking about it because why? Because it was in the news in Israel. So there's nothing wrong with looking at the news and filtering that through a biblical worldview and coming up with, hey, is the Lord getting ready to return? Are we seeing things that are happening that appear to be setting the stage for that? And I personally don't think there's any question about that. One of the things that Jesus talked about, though, was false teaching that would come into the church in the last days. In Jeremiah, 2 Peter chapter 2 says, but there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you. So one thing you understand, too, is the Old Testament is very, very relevant to us as the church. Peter said they had false prophets in the Old Testament days, in the days before the Lord came, and there'll be false teachers among you. So find out what happened then and how they were dealt with. And this is applicable to how you should deal with things in our times. Even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. So I ask you the question, does this sound a little bit like the day and age in which we live? If you speak the truth, what's the kind of reaction that you get? Don't talk about that. You hurt my feelings.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good, you're not. That's right. And through covetousness shall they with vain words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. 2 Timothy chapter 4, preach the word, be instant in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves, having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned into fables. And this is something that I have spent and devoted a lot of time to studying, the apostasy, false teaching in the church. There are very, very popular preachers in America today. I'll use pastors with the square, clearly with the square, these scare quotes around them, like Joel Osteen and others. And what do? They tell people what they want to hear. You're going to have a good life. It's not that bad. Things will get better. You know, and the prosperity teachers, they take it another level, like a Paula White, and say, send me money and God will bless you. And I'm like, how about you send me money and see if God blesses you? Why is it always I got to send you money? Why aren't you planting that faith seed over here in my garden? In Titus chapter 3, it says, reject the divisive man after the first and second admonition, knowing that such a person is warped in sinning, being self-condemned. The word there, divisive, is the word heretikos. Does that sound like anything to you? It sounds like heretic. It's where we get the word heretic. So very often you'll see, and I'm sure some of you have been through church disputes, and they say, oh, you're just being divisive. If you're standing for the truth in the face of heresy and false teaching, you are not the divisive one. The divisive one, mark this, is always, 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 always the false teacher. The person who stands for the truth is never the divisive one. And this thing has been turned upside down, and it's used to drive people who stand for things that are the truth out of churches. In Romans chapter 16, Paul also talks about it. Now I urge you, brethren, note those who cause what? Divisions and offenses, contrary, and how are they dividing? Contrary to the doctrine which you learned, and avoid them. For those who are such do not serve our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by smooth words and flattering speech they deceive the hearts of the simple. So the divisions there is a similar word, dikastasia, and it just means that it's divisions contrary to what they have been taught. And that's similar to what, again, that was talked about in Titus chapter 3. Jeremiah has a whole chapter devoted to this. I'm only going to share a few verses. I'm going to give you some examples of what I think is clear false teaching, sometimes kind of subtle. And one of the things I like to do is I don't like to read things to you that people have said. I spend a lot of time digging out quotes, editing videos, and making sure that I get the things in context so that I'm not accused of making up a fake video to say something that someone didn't say. So, look, I'm a lawyer. I've been a trial lawyer for a while now, almost 40 years. And I'm an evidence guy, okay? And I always say this. If you think this is going on, and I hear people sometimes spouting various conspiracy theories, I'll consider it. Show me the evidence. I don't want your theory. I want evidence. Show me some facts. But I'm fact-based. I'm old school. There's been a change, though, in the way you practice law. When I was a young lawyer, they used to take you to seminars to show you techniques, how to be a better speaker, how to act in the courtroom, and that type of thing, and how to effectively present your case. I don't remember when it changed, but I did, and I was sort of a frog in the kettle, but then I realized all of the trial practice seminars have changed. What do they do now? When you get in the courtroom, you got to figure out a way to appeal to their emotions, make them emotionally, have their emotions grip what you're presenting in your case, and like your client and like you. And it's changed the law. It's changed the practice of law, and it's reflected in the larger culture. People are largely driven by emotions and not facts. And I'll show you some examples of this. I'll just say this. There was a big movement, Billy Graham and John Stott started it, called the Lausanne movement. It was about taking the gospel worldwide. And we can all agree with that, world evangelization. They had a big conference in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2010 called Gospel, Global Era, Christian Discipleship and Mission in the Age of Globalization, was one of the articles that was published. It was published by two people I have a lot of respect for, Os Guinness and David Wells. Now they are, I would say, in the Christian field, they would lean more towards the Reform camp, probably amillennial. They don't really believe in a coming 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. And David Wells has written some great books. So that's David Wells, that's Os Guinness. But in this article, here's what they wrote. Needless to say, globalization poses a sharp challenge to both accuracy and humility. And we know this is coming in the end times, right? This globalization, push for a one world order and everything, poses a sharp challenge to both accuracy and humility. And we need to start by avoiding the two equal and opposite pitfalls into which so many fall. The excessive wow attitudes of the cheerleaders, those pushing for globalization, and the excessive what? Gloom and doom of the curmudgeons who in their Christian form view globalization as the precursor to the end times. Now, I will tell you that calling someone a curmudgeon is not a compliment. The irony of this was, about a week before I saw this article, Pam and I were out here at her parents' in Southern California, and I heard that Os Guinness was speaking over at Biola. So I thought, well, we'll drive over to Biola and we'll listen to Os. Because he was discipled heavily by Francis Schaeffer, and he's been good in apologetics and everything. And so here, a week after, and guess what his topic was that night? We Christians need to be more civil to each other. So then a week later, I read his article. Unless you believe in end times Bible prophecy, then you're a curmudgeon. And I'm like, do you know how to spell hypocrite? I mean, let's see. I'm going to skip over some of this just because I'll do a mercy killing on some of my slides. There's a guy named Rob Bell. He's written a book called What is the Bible? Now, how many of you ever had a Rob Bell book? Go ahead, you can admit it. Okay. And you'll admit I had one of his early ones. What? Velvet Elvis, thank you. I shredded it when I got rid of it because I was afraid somebody might find it. But I got some good quotes out of it. But I got a lot of heat at my church because, I hear you're down on Rob Bell. And I'm like, have you read Velvet Elvis? You should be down on Rob Bell too. One thing I noticed about Rob Bell, somebody said, well, I got a Rob Bell book, and there was a lot of white space, so I could make a lot of notes as to what he was getting wrong. And I've often said, yes, the most valuable part of a Rob Bell book was the white space where there was nothing. If you could keep that and throw the rest away, it would be good. He's written, he went on tour with Oprah. He did this thing on Love Wins, There's No Hell. And I was told by some pastors once, well, you shouldn't be down on Rob Bell because we called up his church and he believes in the 5 fundamentals of the faith. Now, what did I respond? Look, I'm a lawyer, so I not only do I love arguing, my whole life is arguing. So my whole career revolves around it to some degree. And I said, you need to check. When Rob Bell says, I believe in the 5 fundamentals of the faith, first question should be what? What do you mean by believe, Rob? And so the fact that he's ended up with the high priestess of modern New Age religion and everything, and this was done on Super Soul Sunday show with Oprah during the Super Bowl a few years back, and she was asking him, what about gay marriage? Okay, this is before the Supreme Court decision, and how's this going to impact the church? And here is Rob and Kristen Bell.
When is the church going to get that? We're close.
I think it's evolving.
Lots of people are already there. We think it's inevitable, and we're moments.
A moment away from the church.
Yeah, absolutely.
It.
Absolutely. You think we're moments away? I think culture is already there, and the church will continue to be even more irrelevant when it quotes letters from 2,000 years ago as their best defense.
Did he really say that?
Church will continue to be even more irrelevant when it quotes letters from 2,000 years ago as their best defense.
Okay. Reject a factious man after the first warning. The heretic. So, reject or accept what Rob Bell says. This is a denial of Scripture. He came out in favor of same-sex marriage. He has come out in favor of transgenderism and how wonderful and beautiful it is, and acts like he's loving in all this. That people, I'm gonna get. This is my wife. She was sitting there. She was doing, focus, get back in your lane, stay. You didn't use your turn signal again. You swerved off. There are studies. There's a guy named, I think it's Lawrence or Larry McHugh. He was the, and I don't even know if he's a Christian, he was the head psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Johns Hopkins is where they did the first sex reassignment surgery back in the 60s. So they have studied it longer than anybody else. And they, about 20 years ago or more, they stopped doing sex reassignment surgeries at Johns Hopkins. Now, why did they do that? They found, first of all, that if people are treated, counseled, 90+% of them will grow out of it and get over it. They found that where they actually changed the sex of an individual, they were 22 times more likely to commit suicide. So you tell me, Rob Bell, that you're more loving when you're increasing a person's chance of committing suicide by 22 times? You're a fraud, in addition to being a heretic. But this is what happens, and people think that these guys are very kind and loving. I could go on and I could show you quotes from Bell where he talks about people believing in the end times. Well, let me play this one. And in this one picture on the upper right, I showed this to somebody once and they said, boy, what happened to Sinead O'Connor? She really went to pot, didn't she? So this is because they mistook Rod for her. And if you don't know who she is, then the joke falls apart.
This idea that if you're really connected with God, this life is, okay, it's nice, but you're going somewhere else. And that's really where it's at. And so you really can't be bothered with the blood and guts of life here because you're so advanced, you're on your way somewhere else. And he says right here, be so careful of a disembodied, meaning a gospel that doesn't also say it's about the physical as well as the spiritual. They're integrated because humans are integrated beings. It's in a sense. What was this first century heresy? Somebody told me what they call it, and I thought it was brilliant. Next, let's call it evacuation theology. I'm going to be out of here. So just remember that. Whatever I'm about, at some point I'm going to be out of here. Because I'm super spiritual, and I got the ticket, and I'm gone. In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned, making it a missile, meaning my religion could kill you.
Do you hear the mocking?
It's like kind of Star Trek Jesus, beamed up. No, it's the one who stays. That's the point. The one who understands what God has been up to all along, which is not torching this place and starting somewhere else. It's a reclaiming and a rediscovering of everything that God originally said. Now that is good.
He went on in that talk. It was a talk he gave at Marshall Church back about 2005. I paid $1 to download this monstrosity of a message so I would have a record of it. It was called Wine in Heaven. He then went on to say is that Christians went to Africa to evangelize Africa, and they preached to them that Jesus was going to come back, and in the second coming he was going to rapture them. He was going to come back and rescue them. And his implication was that this was in Rwanda, and you remember the Rwandan massacre. And here's a picture of one of those churches, and people were slaughtered by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, as tribes fought. And Rob Bell's point was, Well, because you believe you're going to get out of here, then you have no reason not to kill your neighbor. It's a false, vicious, evil, sick attack on faithful, Bible-believing Christians. And he gets away with it. So he gets to go on tour with Oprah, and he's a fraud. You have things like the Shack. I posted a couple things on the Shack last year. I mean, it was shared thousands of times on Facebook. It's just because I think people understand, and it's wrecked the theology and concept of God. Here's a guy who loves this named Brian Zahnd. He's a pastor. I think he's like in St. Joseph, Missouri. Sinners in the hands of a loving God. So he takes the gospel and everything and he kind of flips it upside down. And here's, the William, what's his name? Is it William Young? That is the author of The Shack, and he's got a show now, or had a show for a while on TBN. And they have no problem with that. So here's another one I want to talk about, Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley is very influential. I'm going to play a couple clips of Andy. Listen, he's the son of Charles Stanley. I know everybody loves Charles Stanley, and every time, don't ask me the question, what does Charles think of what Andy's teaching? And the answer will be, every year Charles does a cruise for his followers and supporters of his ministry, and Andy goes along and speaks. And I'm willing to exercise some grace when it's somebody's son involved. So he did a series a number of years ago. This was called Between Grace and Truthy.
When Gracie Meets Truthy.
When Gracie Meets Truthy, thank you. And so what he did was, and somebody says, well, he talked about this couple at his church. They had been married and then they got divorced. And then the lady shows up with a new boyfriend. She's going to get married, and the guy that she divorced shows up with his boyfriend, and they're going to get married. And so they had a big thing. What do we do at this church? Do we allow these people to serve in the church? And the conclusion that North Point reached in all that was, well, the two gay guys could not serve in the church anymore because one of their divorces wasn't final yet, therefore they were engaged in adultery. But the implication was, as long as the divorces are final, then you guys can do what you do and serve in the church. Some people said, well, he maybe just didn't understand the implication. Listen, he made up a PowerPoint slide with a clear delineation of who the family was. There was no mistake as to where he was going. And this happens over and over again. And I know people will look at me and they say, you're taking it out of context, you don't believe it. So let's listen to what he says. This is from a sermon series a couple years ago.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't want their life to be better, and who doesn't want to be better at life? And here's what you've discovered, and here's what we've discovered, and here's hopefully what you'll discover. When you decide to follow Jesus, regardless of what you believe about Jesus, even if you never come to the conclusion that he's the Son of God, even if you never see him as the Savior of the world, anybody who takes the teachings of Jesus seriously, anyone who embraces the teachings of Jesus, your life will be better and you will be better at life. And who does not want their life to be better, and who doesn't want to be better at life?
Does that, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, does that eviscerate the gospel or not? Okay, here's another one.
In this series, but throughout the Gospels, the word that Jesus came back to over and over and over and over again is the word that we're going to camp out on in this series, and it's simply the word follow. Second one, and this is hard to even say. Being an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you. You say, Andy, I can't follow Jesus. I don't even believe any of that stuff about Jesus. So, listen. None of Jesus' earliest followers believed. None. In fact, when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's so funny. 2 years in, Jesus does something, and it says, and they believed. I'm like, well, what have they been doing for 2 years? Not believing. In fact, Jesus was constantly saying, these are the guys that are with him all the time. Your unbelief. He would chastise them for their lack of belief. They're going, we're trying to believe. We're trying to believe. It doesn't matter how little faith you have, even if you have no faith. You are invited to become a follower of Jesus, which means you don't have to believe he's divine. You don't even have to believe he's historical. I just dare you to pick up a Bible and read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, or any part, and just say, you know what? I don't even believe it's necessarily real. I don't even know if he existed, but I'm going to find something in here that is within the realm of possibility for me to do. And I'm just going to be a Jesus follower that follows maybe some of the easy teachings of Jesus. I dare you to try. Jesus says, I'll take that. My invitation to follow is extended to those who aren't even sure they believe. Number 3, the invitation to follow is purely an invitation to relationship.
Okay, so I'll cut that clip a little bit short because I don't want to be accused of the Bible teaching equivalent of waterboarding you by making you listen to some. But I'm going to make you listen to one more. Here's one more.
This is one reason we build big churches. People say, why do you have to make them so big? Let me tell you why we make them so big. You probably didn't know this. This is kind of an insider secret. We want churches to be large enough so that there are enough middle schoolers and high schoolers that we don't have one youth group with middle school and high school together. We want there to be so many adults that there will be so many middle school and high school kids that we can have 2 separate environments. So when I hear adults say, well, I don't like a big church, I like about 200, I want to be able to know everybody, I say, you are so stinking selfish. You care nothing about the next generation. All you care about is you and your 5 friends. You don't care about your kids. Anybody else's kids are like, what's up? I'm saying, if you don't go to a church large enough, come on, if you don't go to a church large enough where you can have enough middle schoolers and high schoolers to separate them so they can have small groups and grow up the local church, you are a selfish adult. Get over it. Find yourself a big old church where your kids can connect with a bunch of people and grow up and love the local church. Instead, what you do, can you tell I'm passionate about this? Yeah. Here's what you do. I mean, I'm so sick of this. I hear this all the time. Well, I just don't like a big church. Well, okay, look. So here's what you do. You drag your kids to a church they hate. And then they grow up and hate the local church. And then they go off to college. And you know what you pray for? You pray there will be a church in their college town that they connect with. And guess what? All those churches are big. The kind of church you don't like. So let me move on. Let me just say this. Parents, don't attend a church that teaches your children to hate church.
Well, I do have... I'm going to play another one. So, waterboard away, right?
Perhaps you were taught, as I was taught, Jesus loves me, this I know, and let's all finish it together for the... Yes, this is where our trouble began.
Really trouble?
Okay, last one, I promise. I do.
But who doesn't? Who doesn't want
this
their
is the
life to
same
be
old
better?
one.
Who doesn't want to be better?
Oh, so merciful. A few years ago, Andy Stanley's church sponsors a thing called Catalyst Conference. I know people, they've relocated ministries to be close to Atlantis because they want to partner with Catalyst, Andy's organization. At the Catalyst Pastors Conference in Dallas, Catalyst West in Dallas, and I believe it was 2014, a friend of mine, Jim Fletcher, attended, and he sent me a link where I could download the experience kit that they had, and included in the kit was a coupon so that the pastors that attend and leaders that attended that conference could go back home and have their church staff do a thing called the Enneagram. Have you ever heard of the Enneagram? It's a new age, mystical, sort of psychological assessment tool, personality test, but it's rooted in the new age. So for example, it says, this is from the Enneagram Institute website. The Enneagram of personality types is a modern synthesis of a number of ancient wisdom traditions, but the person who originally put the system together was Oscar Icazo, born in Bolivia and raised there and in Peru, but as a young man moved to Buenos Aires to learn about the school of inner work he had encouraged. Thereafter, he journeyed to Asia and gathered other additional information. Another key influence Icazo employed in developing these ideas comes from mystical Judaism, particularly the teachings of the Kabbalah. Central to the Kabbalah is this, and it goes on. This is a new age, mystical, ancient thing, and Andy Stanley's organization saw no problem with giving this to pastors and leaders who had paid $300 or $400 to attend his conference. This, my friends, is wrecking the church. These are the pastors and the leaders. Did you hear an outcry from anybody that saw this? Also at that conference was this young lady, Philemina Hurwitz. Now, she spoke at the conference. She has a contemplative prayer, Lectio Divina. She's into mysticism, which is unbiblical. She led the crowd in contemplative prayer. She has a video there. I call her one of well, I don't care. I'm already going to jail for here anyway. I call her one of the mystic chicks, okay? There's a number of them, and they're pushing this mysticism on the church. By the way, I just recently learned when I was doing some research about the Enneagram, how is this thing getting into the church? Her husband is the big pusher of the Enneagram. That's like her thing is the mysticism, he does the New Age Enneagram. And they go around to churches. Fortunately, she doesn't speak at Christian colleges or anything. See that picture? Well, that's Taylor University Chapel in Upland, Indiana. Conservative school. Speaking, that was a couple of years ago. Almost a year to the day before, she spoke at Biola's Chapel. Do we have a problem or not? And I'm just telling you, if I stood here, and I could give you examples like this for days, not hours, days, if not weeks, of this stuff in the evangelical church. Jesus warned 4 times more than anything else in the end times, take heed that no man deceive you. Every book in the New Testament has warnings about false teaching. The whole book of Jude, by the way, which comes, I think, divinely in our Bibles just before Revelation, is about deception and false teaching and apostasy. In fact, can't remember who I heard it from. We have the Acts of the Apostles. That's Acts, written by Dr. Luke. And Jude, the brother of Jesus, wrote Jude, the Acts of the Apostates. And I think it's a good example. And it comes just before Revelation, just before the stuff that's going to unfold at the end. And I don't think there's any mistake in how the Bible has been put together with regard to that. So Philemina Hurwitz, she goes and she talks about her influences. Now I want to... Somebody messing with the clock. Are we on a different time zone here or something? No, I'm just kidding. I do this all the time. So I don't have my wife here because she'd be circling bring it in for a landing. That's her thing. And she's probably sitting, if she figured out how to get on live stream, she's probably doing that, and she'll probably send me a message on my phone. But not yet, but I'm waiting for it to buzz. But the Pope came to America during the Obama administration. I think it was 2015. He had gone to Israel earlier in the year. I have pictures of this where he went to Bethlehem, and there at the Church of the Nativity, the first Christian church really built by Constantine and his mother, and probably I have no doubt this is on the authentic site where Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem. He did a mass in Nativity Square with a giant mural, and the baby was wrapped in a Palestinian scarf. Joseph had a Palestinian khalifa on. Mary wore a burqa. The 3 wise men were Pope John Paul I, II, Pope Paul VI, and Pope John the 23rd. It was blasphemous. And when the Pope came to speak at Congress, he mentioned 3 people that were very important, that he said you should follow them as examples. And it was then that I learned that the Pope's real religion was not Catholicism, it was leftism or Marxism. And even Catholics say, what's going on with this guy? So the 3 people were Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day. She was a radical left-wing Socialist Workers' Party paper and that type of thing. Sexual libertine, I know a little bit about this because a lady that attends our church, her uncle lived with Dorothy Day. So she knew Dorothy. And the other person was this guy named Robert Merton. And so when Philemon Hurwitz talks at these Christian colleges, he says, oh, there are these wonderful people who have restored this mystical tradition to Christianity. People like Thomas Keating and Robert Merton. He was a Catholic Cistercian monk. He died back in the 80s. He was only about 52. He lived as a hermit outside of Louisville or Lexington, Kentucky. He wrote books that were very popular. When he died, he got a column in the New York Times. And he's very influential in the church. Well, just watch, this is just part of a clip from a biography that they made on his life.
Once the nightclubs of New York had been his haunt. Then he became a Trappist monk living in rural Kentucky. Though in seclusion for 27 years, he had become recognized internationally as a spiritual master. Admirers celebrated him.
Merton was what we would call a seer. He saw at a higher level, and that's why a lot of his books, 40 years later, are still current, 50 years, 60 years later, particularly in the rediscovery of the contemplative tradition. He almost reintroduced the word. He pulled back the veil and retrieved it for us.
Others labeled Merton a radical, a renegade who was leading faithful readers astray.
When I told my pastor, the church I was at in Cleveland, that Merton had died, he says, well, maybe God took him so he couldn't do any more harm.
As 1968 begins, Merton is living as a hermit. From his home in the Kentucky woods, his writing on spiritual matters, social justice issues, and cultural concerns reaches a readership of millions.
I have a past to break with. An accumulation of inertia, waste, junk. A great need of clarification, of mindfulness, or rather of no mind. A need for the spirit.
A part of Merton's restlessness is a desire to communicate one-on-one with Asian spiritual practitioners. He has come to see going beyond the divisions of West and East as the defining work of his life. In October of 1968, Merton does go to Asia, a pilgrim seeking insight and communion.
So he came to see us, India, and then he went to Thailand. This moment, very, very important. Closer contact. Now, as a result of sort of closer relation, mutual respect automatically come. So I often describe him as a very, very strong bridge between Catholic monk, Catholic tradition, and Buddhist tradition.
And it's true that Merton died on that trip. He was a bridge, and he is very, very popular among the emerging church. And so people like Philemon Hurwitz, she goes to, here he is with the Dalai Lama. She goes to Christian colleges, she goes to pastors' conferences, and she spreads this Catholic mysticism, New Age, mystical, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever you want to call it, mixture. And what does Jesus say, and what does Jesus do with a mixture of truth and false things, the lukewarm drink of the Laodicean church? He spews it out of his mouth. And yet we have pastor after pastor, seminary after seminary that are falling for this nonsense, and it is wrecking the evangelical church in America and the world. I thought when I was playing the clip of Andy Stanley, if Henry had been here, his head might have exploded. Even a kind guy like him, because of what he did. So that's Merton, and it's just awful. Jeremiah says this. Well, I'll talk a little bit, by the way. In my next talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sites in the Holy Land, and I think how they relate to current events and history and prophecy. And so, in fact, Andy Stanley gave a sermon recently where he says, you don't need the Old Testament. It's all old, and you don't need to pay attention to it. It's serious. It's all been fulfilled. It's all over with. You don't really need to study it. So I'm going to be a rebel, and I'm going to camp in the Old Testament the next hour or whatever I talk. So go read Jeremiah 23. It talks about false teachers, pastors, shepherds who've led their flocks astray, who haven't held firm to the truth. And what do they do? And later in verse around 18, 19, 20, it says they're false because they tell the people what they want to hear. And I think John said he was going to talk about Micaiah, because there were 400 prophets. In fact, that story that he's going to base his message on, if he hasn't given it already, it kind of gives you the ratio of false prophets and teachers to true teachers is at least 400 to 1. It's probably much larger, but there were 400 false prophets in the day of Ahab and Jehoiakim, and only one, Micaiah, was faithful and told the truth. So what you need to find is that pastor, teacher, whatever, that will sit there and tell you the truth. So let's take a look at just some of these geopolitical things. Let's see. Technocracy, technology development. We know that there's this thing coming. It's the mark of the beast. Doug Hand's written a pretty good book on it. You might want to take a look at that. I think it's much deeper than we think it is. I don't think it's just a chip. I think it also involves some kind of loyalty oath or worship of this coming Antichrist. But I want to give you a little clip as to, this is a guy who spoke, and if you've watched this, I've used this clip a few times. This is Dr. Yuri Harari. He is a professor at, I think, Jerusalem University, a historian, and he's talking about, he gave a talk at Davos where all the elite of the world gathered just back in January, and the title of his talk, Will the Future Be Human? Talking about artificial intelligence and what's coming. Just listen to a couple minutes of this.
Within a century or two, Earth will be dominated by entities that are more different from us than we are different from Neanderthals or from chimpanzees. Because in the coming generations, we will learn how to engineer bodies and brains and minds. These will be the main products of the economy, of the 21st century economy. Not textiles and vehicles and weapons, but bodies and brains and minds. Now, how exactly will the future masters of the planet look like?
Now, we don't know what Jesus looked like, okay? And the important point is not what Jesus looked like. It's what this guy thought when he put up the slide. Do you see what he's doing here? And everybody said, oh, well, he's secular. Baloney. He has a religion, okay? It might be artificial intelligence or leftism like the Pope.
This will be decided by the people who own the data. Those who control the data control the future, not just of humanity, but the future of life itself. Because today, data is the most important asset in the world. In ancient times, land was the most important asset. And if too much land became concentrated in too few hands, humanity split into aristocrats and commoners. Then in the modern age, in the last 2 centuries, machinery replaced land as the most important asset. And if too many of the machines became concentrated in too few hands, humanity split into classes, into capitalists and proletariats. Now data is replacing machinery as the most important asset. And if too much of the data becomes concentrated in too few hands, humanity will split not into classes. It will split into species, into different species. Now, why is data so important? It's important because we've reached the point when we can hack not just computers, we can hack human beings and other organisms. There is a lot of talk these days about hacking computers and email accounts and bank accounts and mobile phones, but actually we are gaining the ability to hack human beings. Now, what do you need in order to hack a human being? You need two things. You need a lot of computing power, and you need a lot of data, especially biometric data. Not data about what I buy or where I go, but data about what is happening inside my body and inside my brain.
He goes on to say that in the earlier days that he's a medieval historian, so he knows about serfs and lords of the manor and that type of thing. And he said that, it used to be the serf had a miserable life, but at least he could provide some kind of service to the lord of the manor. He could clean up the barn, he could harvest crops in the field, and so he had something to offer. But he does raise the question in the Q&A is, pretty soon we're going to have a large chunk of humanity that won't have technical experience or knowledge or how to use and analyze data or computers, and they will have no worth or value to anybody. The implication being, what are we going to do with these human beings when they're not worth anything to anyone? We kept the serfs around because we could use them, but you're just spewing carbon and taking up space and eating food that somebody else could get. I'm just telling you this talk, you can find it on the Davos World Economic Forum website. And there's a Q&A session that he participated in, and they both relate to will the future be human? To me, it's I gave it to Doug Hamp. He looked at it last night. It's one of the most frightening talks I've ever seen in terms of this hacking humanity and making people better and melding man and machine. This is Tower of Babel type stuff. And when this happened, God intervened with split up the humanity, not the far, excuse me. He split up humanity, confused the languages. When this whole Tower of Babel thing through technocracy and technology comes about, God is going to intervene again. And there's an earlier talk from another conference last year that the person talked about computer power. I'll tell you what, since I've spent some time on it, listen to the growth of computer power from this talk. I can't remember who this guy is.
The rise of uncertainty, we see it in the US, we see it in Brexit, we see it around the world. Uncertainty is not going away. I wanted to look at one data point that, to me, more than anything else, defines how quickly we are accelerating. Stephen will talk more about this. But this acceleration began in 1960 with the advent of computing. So back in 1960, we had mainframes, a few of them. And then we went to departmental computers. And then we went to laptops, PCs, laptops, mobile devices, the cloud. Here's what's amazing. And you don't hear this very often. You don't hear this, so please pay attention. In every decade since 1960, the number of user computing devices has increased by 1 order of magnitude. It is almost like Moore's law. It is an immutable. Every decade, 1 order of magnitude. So what you see here is a logarithmic scale. It looks very flat, it looks very simple. If we were to draw this in a linear scale, this will go up through the clouds into the stratosphere. Every decade, 1 order of magnitude. So the math is simple, right? So if we do the math to 2100, how many user computing devices will there be? 100 times as many user computing devices as there are grains of sand on all of the world's beaches. Now, I'm being conservative. I'm not including the deserts, just the beaches. How is that possible? It's absurd, you're saying. That couldn't happen. So please, Allow me to take you back to 1960. If in 1960 I said to you today we would have 10 billion user computing devices, and of those 10 billion, 2 billion would be these, 7 billion would be cell phones at large, what would you have thought of me in 1960? You'd have thought absurd. Can't be. It's impossible. Where would we find the resources? How would we use them? What are the economics behind this? How would we create the cooling systems to cool all these computers? You'd be thinking in terms of the past, not in terms of the present. And from where we stand today, it's so difficult to think in terms of the future.
Okay, well, let's just go through a few quick things on geopolitics. I know I called this geopolitics and I haven't talked about geopolitics, but I think all of this stuff, and this is what I talk about every week, usually once a week, sometimes twice, very occasionally twice, but this is very important stuff. I mean, this convergence and acceleration that he talked about in computing power, it's happening with events that are related to Bible prophecy. And as I said at the beginning, people that I know that do this, devote their life to it, when we get together, the conversation always is, I can't keep up anymore. It's going too fast. I can't even process the things that I'm seeing, and I don't even believe what I'm seeing. And I thought the Lord would have come back long before we reached this stage. So it may indicate that God is merciful, that he wants more people to come to faith in Him. But so it's sort of a good news, bad news thing. It's good news, God is merciful. Bad news is things are getting worse in many respects. And then there are people running around talking. I heard a guy on the radio yesterday, this is better than it's ever been in the world. It's just fantastic. It's great progress, and it's just wonderful. And I'm like, okay, great. What planet do you live on? Come to California, or, come to even Ohio where I live. I mean, we have thousands of people dying in Ohio from drug overdoses. The small communities that can't even they don't have the budgets to handle the bodies. They can't even pay to get them cremated. They don't know what to do with them. This is America, okay? I mean, the economy's good, all this stuff is good, everybody, it's wonderful, but it's increasingly dark. But then I know, well, yeah, that's good, because that means Jesus will return soon. And it also helps, I think, disconnect Christians from the world. It's sort of like, okay, I'm really going to trust in the Lord, because that's my anchor, that's my rock, that's where I get everything. So, you look at these things. We talk about Syria and the way Syria has gone. This is a picture video. This was on the CNN website the other day. This is a flyover of Raqqa. This was the capital of ISIS. And I can tell you can go through Syria, and city after city after city after city after town after town after village looks like this. Now do you know why more than half the people in Syria don't live where they lived 7 years ago? And they got up with a question.
Yeah, I keep wondering in the biblical prophecy of Damascus being utterly destroyed. We have not heard that yet, but every time I visit Syria, in these pictures, it looks utterly destroyed.
Did you look at my slides while I was away from my computer? Because here's the Jobar neighborhood in Damascus. This is a before and after picture. You can see how here we go. Greater Damascus, Jobar neighborhood. This is before, and this is a recent satellite image. And it's like this all over Damascus. So the question you ask, and then you'll see Aleppo and some of the other cities in these before and after comparisons with recent satellite images that were specially commissioned to put this together. Here's Homs, central area, important part of Homs. It's just like, it's all over the place. And so you asked a question about Damascus, and we know that there's a prophecy about Damascus. Zechariah 9, the oracle of Damascus, that talks about it. Isaiah 17, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, the burden against Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from it being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. And so you look at these pictures, you look at the drone flyovers that have been done, even a couple years ago before some of the recent bombings, barrel bombings that took place. And so the question is Damascus a ruinous heap? And I would say it's well on its way. okay? I mean, you know, they talk about Damascus and other cities in Syria. There's prophecies about them and Gaza and that type of thing. Gaza will see it and they'll weep and they'll mourn for the king and that type of thing. Prophecies in Jeremiah and Zechariah and Isaiah all talking about this coming destruction. So the answer is this the fulfillment of Bible prophecy? And my answer is not quite yet. But listen, you look at the pictures now, the parts that Assad lives in and controls, they're very nice. He still has parks and that type of thing. In fact, there was a picture, maybe it's this one, of central Damascus, okay? This part over here is okay, and this part is destroyed. I mean, and so like the park area was fine and the hospital was destroyed because it was in a Sunni neighborhood, and they're trying to get rid of the Sunnis. I mean, and it's very complicated. You can't go into it. A lot of other things going on geopolitically. You know, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he went to England and said that Turkey was part of a triangle of evil, which would be Iran, Turkey, and radical Islamic groups. So a lot of people are running around, I even heard Christian guys going, oh, you know, Mohammed bin Salam, he's moderate Muslim, he's moderating, and King Abdullah of Jordan goes to Davos and he goes, oh, we believe in the Virgin Mary, we believe in Jesus and all this other stuff. And I've heard Christian guys get on the ring and say, look, they're so close, they're getting better. And I'm like, when do Muslims become moderate and nice and kind? What's their theology? When they're weak. So Saudi Arabia's been weak, it's been weakened by a number of things, and so Mohammed bin Salam is running around making nice with everybody. And he's getting a lot of criticism from it. Here's a guy from Iran saying, you know, he's getting cozy with Israel, and we know we can never trust the Jews, and so maybe they shouldn't have be the custodians of the holy places in Mecca and Medina. That's a pretty significant statement. You know, you may not have noticed there's a bit of a conflict in the Arab world these days, in the Muslim world. Erdogan came out and said that, well, I have a slide here, just let me go through these real quickly. I might go over just a few minutes. Turkish troops pushed deeper into northern Syria, moving closer to Israel, which I think is their ultimate goal, to take that back and to really control the Middle East for the Ottoman Empire. Here's this is just in the last week. 200,000 civilians fled Syria's Afrin area in northern Syria, just in the last 3 days. 200,000 people. How big is Sacramento? What is it, 1 million people? Well, the city and suburbs. What is it? Okay, so that means 1 out of every 7 people in Sacramento would have picked up and moved in the last 3 days. Would that get your attention? What would it take to catch the attention of people that don't do this? So we pretend that there's a country called Syria, and you can see these squares all over the place. Robert Kaplan gave a great talk at Davos. He looks at geography, boring geography, but he looks at the shift that's occurred in the world, and he says this is this thing, the return of Marco Polo's world and the U.S. military response. That's a paper he wrote. He's got a book out, and then he did a talk at a panel at Davos on this, talking about geography and geopolitics, you know, things like that we don't even really think of. America is blessed because we have the most unique geography of any country in the world. We have coasts to guard us on both sides. We have neighbors north and south. And we have these massive navigable rivers that drain our industrial and agricultural heartland down to ports, either up through the St. Lawrence Seaway or down to New Orleans. And water transportation is the cheapest in the world. So there's a geographical blessing that America has that no other country in the world has. Moscow, that's why Moscow's kind of feisty. They're concerned they're going to be trapped. They've got 11 time zones that their country covers. It's the largest country on the earth by far, but they have like a little port that they can use some of the time on the North Sea, and they have stuff on the Black Sea, but they have to go through the Bosphorus, which is only, 2 miles, maybe not even 2 miles wide, that Turkey could close off and trap their fleet there. That's why they wanted the port in Syria. So all of this geography and geopolitics plays into the fact that, and these are these end time players that we see talked about in Bible prophecy: Persia, Iran, Turkey, Tagarma, and those other places that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And we see Russia from the north coming down and sort of trying to influence us. And now Russia is making pushes into Libya, which is Put, and Kush, which is Sudan. And all of these things are sort of converging together. I mean, I'm not making it up. Go look at the geopolitical map. And so this is what Kaplan says in his article: as Europe disappears, Eurasia coheres. The supercontinent of Asia, Eurasia, is becoming one fluid, comprehensible unit of trade and conflict as the Westphalian system of states weakens and older imperial legacies, Russia, Chinese, Iranian, Turkish, become paramount. Do you understand what he's saying? Is the nation states are going away, and these big imperial powers, many of which are mentioned in Bible prophecy, are going forward. I'm only stealing, Doug Krieger. I'm only stealing for my own time because I'm in this room next hour. So leave me alone. Every crisis from Central Europe to the ethnic Han Chinese heartland is now interlinked. There is one singular battle space. Listen, what Bible prophecy tells us is that the world is going to come together. There's going to be this new world order, that these things will come. And these people are going to come against Israel and Jerusalem.
The way to understand it.
This is, that's Kaplan. I don't have time to go into that. This is Foreign Affairs, just their new issue, Iran among the ruins. And then there's tremendous turmoil. Here's the Ayatollah Khamenei's blog last week. Shia and Sunni are unanimous and acknowledge Lady Fatima's virtues. I thought she was Catholic. Well, she is, but you see the unifying of the religions that are happening, and then the Pope bringing in leftism into the whole mix. He also said something about, I think he said, if the world of Islam wants to achieve dignity, it has to stand up against Zionism. What's that mean? It's the Jews. It's always the Jews. They cause problems. I'm sure you saw this video clip. This was Vladimir Putin speaking, and they had this video clip of all these nuclear weapons, a nuclear-powered missile that can fly and change direction and avoid systems. And it's interesting that as you see some of these things, as he goes through this, they're attacking Florida. So, and these weapons, they're pretty sure that he has a lot of these. We just had an administration for 8 years that didn't care about that, and so we're behind the 8 ball. Some of our systems are 50 years old. I mean, I hope they work. They might survive an EMP attack just because they don't have any chips in them or anything like that. They're all old radio tubes. Nuclear-powered submarines. So these are things that are happening. There's a new thing at the Institute for Study of War about how Russia's really setting up the West thinks they're going to do asymmetrical, unconventional warfare in Ukraine, and they're going to do conventional warfare in the Baltic states. But it's actually the opposite. They have divisions of tanks and everything, and staged in groups to come in after, like in Ukraine. The Baltics, they will probably do an asymmetrical sort of disrupt the society type attack. And this is planned. I mean, you can, here's a map, but this report just came out the other day. So next hour, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Israel in the Old Testament and Bible prophecy. I just want to make one more point, and then I can calm Krieger down. Do you understand I could go for a long time like this? Okay. And if you see my videos, I say this all the time. Just 5 more minutes. And so if you ever have to leave when I'm talking, I won't be offended. I'm used to it. This is a report from a newspaper in Turkey. And what Erdogan was saying, or what they were saying in this newspaper, is all the Islamic countries need to get together to beat Israel. And there was a panel at the recent Munich Security Conference a few weeks ago. These people spoke. This man right here is the defense minister of Lebanon. And he essentially said the Middle East conflict is now global Middle East. The whole world is involved, whether they want to be or not. And the solution is to solve the Palestinian issue. Now, should this surprise anybody who studies Bible prophecy? It shouldn't. So, again, lots and lots going on. I will close with this. This is Newsweek magazine this week. This is from the front page of the Jerusalem Post, that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has had so many probes done on him that whether they're true or not, there's just too many of them for him to effectively govern. And it's interesting, there's a parallel. That's what's going on in Israel is also happening in our country. They've fired McCabe yesterday, the assistant director of the FBI, for good reason. Trump said, good, that was great, fired him. John Brennan, the former head of the CIA, tweeted this morning at 5 a.m. When the full extent, to the president, when the full extent of your venality, moral turpitude, and political corruption becomes known, you will take your rightful place as a disgraced demagogue in the dustbin of history. You may scapegoat Andy McCabe, but you will not destroy America. America will triumph over you. It would have been much better if we had the nice, clean, non-corrupt Hillary Clinton as our president, wouldn't it have been? And the world has lost its collective mind. So Jesus said, this is going to happen. And so that's what we do at Fellowship Bible Chapel. You can find it at YouTube, John Haller or Fellowship Bible Chapel. It should come up. Can I say with 100% certainty that this is the end times? I'm just saying, yes, with the rebirth of the nation of Israel, it sure looks like it. And I will talk about that in about 20 minutes in this room, a little bit about some of the things we learned on our trip last year. So can I pray? And okay, Father, I just pray that you will make us all good Bereans, that we will always examine the things that we hear and learn and see through the lens of Scripture, to study, that even as the people studied when they heard the apostles, they went into the Scripture to see if these things were so. I just pray that you will make us all good Bereans, steel our hearts, protect our minds, make us bold, confident conveyors of the truth of the Word of God and the wonderful gospel of salvation through faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, your Son. In Jesus' name, amen.